My name is Myra Winters. I'm 72 years old. The morning before my husband's will was read, my phone rang at exactly 7:03 a.m. The caller introduced himself as attorney Raymond Sloan. His voice was calm, almost cautious. "Mrs. Winters, there is a second document your stepson knows nothing about. Come to my office tomorrow morning, alone, and tell no one where you're going." I didn't ask questions. I simply wrote down the address, poured myself another cup of coffee, and stared at the oak table my husband had built with his own hands. 24 years of marriage, 19 years of one impossible secret, and somehow it was all about to come crashing down. What happened during that will reading changed an entire family forever. But to understand why, you need to know how everything began. Douglas Winters walked into the county clerk's office 24 years earlier, carrying a stack of building permits under one arm and sawdust on his jacket. I stamped his paperwork. He smiled. "You have the steadiest hands I've ever seen." I laughed. At 48, I wasn't looking for romance. Neither was he. We had both buried spouses we loved. We both knew what it felt like to return to an empty house every night. Loneliness doesn't scream. It whispers. 3 months later, we were married in a quiet courthouse ceremony. No wedding band, no expensive reception. Just two people who had already learned that tomorrow is never guaranteed. Douglas was a contractor. He built homes, repaired barns, and helped neighbors who couldn't afford professionals. Our farmhouse sat on 40 peaceful acres outside a small New Jersey town. It wasn't luxurious, but it became our world. For our first anniversary, Douglas surprised me with something no jewelry store could ever sell: a solid white oak dining table. He built every inch of it himself. Underneath the tabletop, where nobody could see, he carved our initials. That table witnessed 24 years of breakfasts, arguments, birthdays, laughter, tears, and quiet evenings with nothing more than coffee and conversation. It became the heart of our home. Douglas had 2 children from his first marriage. Bryce was 46, confident, ambitious, always chasing a lifestyle his income couldn't quite support. Every few months he appeared at our door with another financial emergency. "Dad, I just need a little help. 6 months and I'll pay every penny back." He never did. By the time Douglas became ill, Bryce owed his father well over $100,000. Douglas never argued. He simply kept believing his son would eventually do the right thing. Nora was different. She worked as an accountant, quiet, polite, careful with every word. She never treated me badly, but she never accepted me either. For 24 years, she called me Myra. Never mom, never family. I never asked her to. Love cannot be demanded. Then cancer entered our lives. Stage 3 lung cancer. The doctors predicted 18 months. Douglas survived 14. As his strength disappeared, something else began to grow. Bryce suddenly became interested in his father's finances. He volunteered to organize paperwork. He checked bank statements, opened mail, called financial advisors. "I'm only helping Dad," he always said. Maybe he believed it. Maybe he didn't. Nora visited every Sunday with flowers and quiet conversations. But more than once, I caught her making copies of documents from Douglas's office when she thought no one was watching. I stayed silent. My energy belonged to Douglas. Every 4 hours came another medication, another hospital visit, another sleepless night beside his bed. I didn't have enough strength left to fight suspicion. One evening, only weeks before he died, Douglas reached for my hand. His grip was weak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me something." "I promise. Don't let them take the house." I looked at him, confused. "We already have a will." He simply shook his head. "Just promise." So I did. I had no idea why those words mattered. Not yet. Douglas passed away early on a Tuesday morning. I was holding his hand when the heart monitor fell silent. For a long time, I couldn't move. Bryce arrived 2 hours later. He looked at his father's face, then turned toward me. "We need to discuss the arrangements." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just arrangements. Something inside me understood, long before my mind accepted it. This wasn't going to be about grief. It was going to be about something else entirely. And I was about to discover just how far some people would go for an inheritance. Douglas's funeral was held 3 days later at Grace Lutheran Church. More than 80 people came. He had spent his entire life building homes, repairing churches, and helping neighbors. The pastor called him a man who built things that would outlive him. I stood beside the casket, wearing a black dress Douglas had bought years earlier after a friend's funeral. "Better to have one before you need it," he had said. Neither of us imagined I would wear it for him. Bryce stood with his wife, Jolene. She arrived wearing a bright white blazer. It was the first thing everyone noticed. The second thing was what she said. During the reception at our farmhouse, she waited until we were alone in the kitchen. "Myra," she began with a polite smile, "we should talk about the house." I kept pouring coffee. Bryce is Douglas's oldest son. It only makes sense for the farmhouse to stay in the Winters family. I looked at her. Douglas hasn't even been gone a full day. I'm only being practical. So am I. That ended the conversation, or so I thought. Later that evening, I found Jolene's handbag behind a chair. I picked it up to return it. A folder had slipped halfway out. Curiosity isn't usually one of my faults. That day, it was. Inside were printed real estate reports. Our farmhouse, 40 acres, estimated market value, $1.6 million. She had brought property valuations to my husband's funeral. Not memories, not condolences, property valuations. I quietly placed everything back exactly as I had found it. 3 days later, Jolene made sure the entire family knew how she felt. She posted inside the private Winters family Facebook group. "Our father-in-law's legacy belongs to his children, not some woman who showed up 20 years late." Within hours, dozens of relatives had liked the post. Some even shared it. Others left comments agreeing that the house should remain with Douglas's children. No one asked for my side. No one called. Except Betty. Betty Callahan had been my closest friend since I moved to town. She sounded furious. "Myra, have you seen what that woman posted?" "I have." "And?" I closed Facebook. "Myra, aren't you going to answer them?" I looked across the porch toward the fields Douglas loved so much. "I've stayed quiet for 24 years, Betty. I can stay quiet a little longer." Unfortunately, silence didn't stop them. A week later, Bryce's attorney sent me a formal letter. It politely requested that I transfer the farmhouse into Douglas's estate so it could be divided among the heirs. The word voluntary appeared several times. The word litigation appeared more than once. The message couldn't have been clearer. Give up the house, or prepare for court. Nora sent only one text. Dad would have wanted the house to stay with the real family. The real family. I read those words several times before placing my phone face down. Then I made dinner for one. Meanwhile, Jolene organized something even worse. A petition. She carried printed pages to family gatherings, asking relatives to sign their names in support of Bryce's claim to the farmhouse. 23 people signed. She proudly posted photographs of every page online. The family has spoken. Soon, neighbors began asking when I planned to move. Some even apologized in advance. Apparently, everyone already believed I had lost my home. Except, I hadn't. They simply didn't know it yet. That evening, I sat alone at the oak table Douglas had built. My fingers followed every scratch in the wood. Every mark held a memory. Coffee stains from countless mornings, tiny dents from holiday dinners, a faint pencil line Douglas once drew while planning repairs to the barn. 24 years, reduced to an asset people wanted to divide. They thought they were fighting over Douglas's house. They had no idea whose house it really was. The following Tuesday, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Mrs. Winters? Yes? My name is Raymond Sloan. I was your husband's private attorney. I frowned. Douglas already had an attorney. We had updated our will years ago. I don't understand. Your husband met with me privately 8 months before his passing. He prepared documents no one else knows about. My heart began beating faster. There is something your stepson doesn't know. I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning. Come alone. And please, tell no one where you're going. The office sat above an old hardware store on Main Street. Small, quiet, nothing impressive. Raymond Sloan greeted me with a firm handshake before placing a thick manila envelope on his desk. Douglas's initials were written across the seal. Blue ink, his handwriting. I recognized it immediately. He wanted me to give this to you after his death, Sloan said quietly. He planned everything very carefully. Inside the envelope were 3 separate items: a legal document, an amendment to his will, and 1 sealed letter. Sloan rested his hand on the envelope. Mrs. Winters, what you're about to see is going to change everything. Raymond Sloan carefully opened the manila envelope. He placed 3 documents on the desk, one by one. The first one, he said, is the property deed. I leaned forward. After 28 years working at the county clerk's office, I could recognize a deed at a glance. Then I saw the owner's name. Myra Campbell Winters. My maiden name. My married name. My signature. Sloan watched my face. You already knew. I nodded. Yes. I bought the property. He smiled slightly. Douglas said you would answer exactly like that. Then he explained why I had been called there. 19 years ago, your husband lost this farm. The memory returned instantly. Douglas's business partner had been stealing money for years. By the time everything was uncovered, the company was drowning in debt. The bank foreclosed on the farmhouse. We had 60 days before the auction. I still remember Douglas sitting at our kitchen table, staring at the foreclosure notice. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He simply looked defeated. The strongest man I had ever known suddenly looked helpless. The next morning, I went to the bank alone. Over nearly 3 decades, I had saved every spare dollar I could. My salary, life insurance from my first husband, small investments, no vacations, no luxury cars, just careful saving. Everything together came to $178,000. It was every cent I owned. The tax auction lasted less than 15 minutes. Only 3 bidders showed up. When the final bid was accepted, I became the legal owner of the farmhouse. Douglas stood outside afterward with tears running down his face. "I failed," he whispered. "You saved everything." Then he asked one thing. "Please don't tell Bryce or Nora. If they learn I lost the house, they'll never look at me the same way again." So I made him a promise, and for 19 years, I never broke it. Back in Sloane's office, he picked up the second document. This is the codicil. Douglas had quietly amended his will 8 months before his death. 2 independent witnesses had signed it. His physician had certified he was mentally competent. Everything had been done correctly. Sloane began reading aloud. "If any beneficiary threatens, harasses, attempts legal action against, or seeks to seize property belonging to my wife, Myra Winters, within 6 months of my passing." He paused. "That beneficiary immediately forfeits his or her inheritance." I looked up. "What happens to it?" "It transfers into education trusts for your grandchildren. You become the trustee." I closed my eyes for a moment. Douglas hadn't been planning revenge. He had been planning protection. He knew exactly what his children would try to do. "There is one more item," Sloane said. He held up the sealed envelope. Douglas's handwriting covered the front. "To be opened during the will reading." He insisted everyone hear it together. I carefully placed the deed, the codicil, and the sealed letter back into the envelope. As I stood to leave, Sloane added quietly, "Your husband told me something during our second meeting." I stopped. He said, "Hope is not a plan. I'm leaving Myra both." Driving home, I felt strangely calm. For the first time since Douglas died, I wasn't afraid. When I pulled into the driveway, another surprise was waiting. Bryce's truck, a white contractor's van, and a man measuring my front porch with a tape measure. I stepped out of my car. "What are you doing?" Bryce smiled as though nothing were unusual. "We're just planning ahead." "Planning what?" Before he could answer, Jolene appeared in my front doorway. She had let herself inside. She was holding fabric samples against my living room curtains. "I think lighter colors would really brighten this place," she said cheerfully. She was redecorating my house, before the will had even been read. I simply smiled. "The kettle will be boiling in a minute. Would anyone like tea?" They stared at me. "No? That's fine." I walked inside, filled the kettle, and sat at Douglas's oak table. The manila envelope rested quietly inside my handbag beside my chair. Everything they wanted, every answer, every truth, was sitting less than 2 feet away. Yet none of them had the slightest idea. I slowly sipped my tea while Bryce continued discussing measurements with his contractor outside. For the first time, waiting no longer felt painful. It felt inevitable. The truth had already won. They just hadn't heard it yet. 2 days before the will reading, Bryce invited the entire family to my house. He never asked for permission. When I returned from the grocery store, 8 people were already sitting around Douglas's oak table. Bryce stood at the head like he was leading a business meeting. Jolene sat beside him with a folder full of papers. Nora quietly watched from the other side. The room fell silent when I walked in. Bryce cleared his throat. I think we all agree Dad would have wanted the farmhouse to stay in the Winters family. Several heads nodded. Myra, he continued, you've lived here a long time. Nobody wants to make things difficult. We just think you'd be happier in a smaller place. Jolene smiled. A nice condo would be perfect for someone your age. Then she delivered the sentence she had already posted online. This house belongs to Douglas's children, not to someone who showed up 20 years late. Nobody corrected her. Nobody defended me. I looked around the room. People I had cooked for, driven to hospitals, helped through funerals, celebrated birthdays with. Yet not one of them questioned whether they belonged in my kitchen, discussing my future. I quietly set my grocery bags on the counter. The will is being read on Thursday. I think we should wait. Bryce folded his arms. Nothing in that will is going to change who owns this house. I smiled politely. We'll see. After everyone finally left, the silence felt heavier than before. I walked across the yard toward Douglas's workshop. The smell of cedar and sawdust still lingered in the air. His tools remained exactly where he had left them. Every wrench, every hammer, every measuring square. Nothing had moved. Sloan had told me before I left his office. Douglas said you'll find something in the third drawer of the workbench. I opened it. Behind several sheets of sandpaper sat a small cedar box. Handmade. Of course it was. Douglas never bought something he could build himself. Inside were 3 things. Our wedding rings, a photograph taken 19 years earlier, and a handwritten note. I unfolded it carefully. You saved this family once. Now I'm saving you. D. I read those words over and over until the ink blurred through my tears. The next afternoon, Nora came alone. No Bryce, no Jolene, no lawyers. She accepted a cup of coffee, but barely touched it. I don't want this to become a war, she said quietly. Neither do I. She stared into her cup. Bryce has already spoken to an attorney. I know. He believes Dad's will can be challenged. I nodded without surprise. Then she looked directly at me. If there's something you're not telling us, this is the time. For a long moment, I almost revealed everything. I almost told her about the auction, about my savings, about the deed, about the promise I had kept for 19 years. Instead, I simply answered, let's wait until tomorrow. She sighed. I wish things had been different. So do I. When she left, her coffee cup was still almost full. That evening, Bryce arrived again, this time with his attorney. Martin Gould spread legal papers across my dining table without asking. My client is prepared to contest Douglas Winters' will, he announced. We believe there were irregularities during Mr. Winters' final months. Bryce leaned back confidently. You can avoid all of this. Transfer the house voluntarily. Take your share of the money. And we'll all move on. I looked from Bryce to the lawyer, then back again. Tomorrow is the will reading. Whatever you think you've already won, I suggest you wait. The lawyer frowned. What do you mean? I simply smiled. You'll understand soon enough. Neither man looked comfortable anymore. For the first time, they realized I wasn't afraid. They packed their papers and left without another word. That night, I sat alone at the oak table. The cedar box rested beside the manila envelope. Douglas's wedding ring caught the light from the kitchen lamp. I picked it up carefully. The gold was scratched from years of hard work. Concrete, wood, paint. Everything Douglas ever touched carried marks of honest labor. I whispered into the quiet room, "Tomorrow." For the first time since losing him, I felt he had already prepared me for this moment. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. Inside, I finally understood why Douglas had asked me to trust him one last time. Tomorrow, the truth would no longer belong only to me. Thursday morning arrived cold and quiet. I dressed with unusual care. The blue blouse Douglas always loved, pearl earrings he had given me on our 20th anniversary, comfortable black shoes. I wasn't dressing for a battle. I was dressing to fulfill my husband's final request. When I reached Raymond Sloane's office, nearly everyone was already there. Bryce sat confidently in a navy suit. Jolene wore bright red. Nora quietly stared at the table. Several relatives had come as well. Apparently, Bryce wanted an audience. Betty squeezed my hand before we entered. "You ready?" I smiled. "I've been ready for 19 years. The conference room held 12 people. No one spoke while Sloane organized his papers. Finally, he adjusted his glasses. "We are gathered for the reading of the last will and testament of Douglas Allen Winters." He began with the original will. The room listened carefully. The farmhouse would be sold. The proceeds divided. 50% to me, 30% to Bryce, 20% to Nora. Bryce relaxed. Jolene smiled. Exactly what they had expected. Then Sloane stopped. He reached into his briefcase and removed another document. There is also a legally executed codicil. Bryce frowned. A what? A formal amendment signed 8 months before Mr. Winters passed away. The room instantly became tense. Sloane unfolded the pages and began reading. Any beneficiary who threatens, harasses, files legal action against, or attempts to seize property belonging to my wife, Myra Winters, within 6 months of my death, shall immediately forfeit his or her inheritance. Silence. Complete silence. Bryce leaned forward. What exactly does that mean? Sloane answered without emotion. It means anyone who violated this clause loses their inheritance. Jolene laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. It isn't. The clause was witnessed by Mr. Winters' physician and independently verified. She immediately stood. He was dying. He wasn't thinking clearly. Sloane calmly placed another document on the table. A medical evaluation completed the same day confirms Mr. Winters was fully competent. Jolene slowly sat back down. For the first time, she looked worried. Sloane continued. The estate also contains records of recent events. He looked directly at Bryce. The attorney's demand letter requesting voluntary transfer of property. He looked toward Jolene. The Facebook campaign. The petition signed by 23 relatives. the repeated attempts to pressure Mrs. Winters into surrendering the farmhouse. He paused. Each of those actions independently satisfies the conditions of the codicil. No one moved. No one even reached for a glass of water. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Bryce's attorney quietly lowered his eyes. Even he understood what had just happened. The inheritance was gone, not because of me, because of their own actions. Jolene tried one last time. This is a setup. Myra manipulated Douglas. Before Sloane could answer, I finally spoke. No. I stayed silent. Douglas planned this himself. He simply knew exactly what would happen after he was gone. The room fell silent again. Sloane nodded. There is still one more document. He carefully removed the final paper from the manila envelope. A property deed. He placed it in the center of the table. Everyone leaned forward. Then he read the owner's name aloud. Myra Campbell Winters. No one reacted at first. It took several seconds for the words to sink in. Bryce blinked. What does that mean? Sloane looked directly at him. It means the farmhouse has legally belonged to Mrs. Winters for 19 years. The property has never been part of Douglas Winters' estate. For a moment, nobody breathed. Bryce stared at me as though he had never seen me before. That's impossible. My father built that house. I met his eyes. Yes. He built it. And I saved it. Every face in the room turned toward me. 19 years ago, your father's business collapsed. The bank foreclosed. I used every dollar I had saved. I bought this property at the county auction. Your father asked me to keep it secret because he couldn't bear the thought of his children seeing him lose everything. Bryce slowly shook his head. You paid for this house? Every penny. And you never told us? I made your father a promise, and I kept it. The room remained perfectly still. The truth had finally arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. Bryce stared at the deed for a long moment. So, you paid for this house? I did. And Dad asked you to keep it secret? He wanted you to remember him as the man who never lost his home. No one spoke. For the first time since Douglas died, the room was completely silent. Then, Sloane opened the final envelope. It was Douglas's last letter. If you're hearing this, then I'm gone. Myra saved this family long before any of you realized it. She spent every dollar she had to protect the home I couldn't. The house was never mine to give away. It has always belonged to her. Bryce lowered his head. 24 years of resentment disappeared in a matter of seconds. I was wrong, he whispered. I'm sorry. Nora quietly wiped away a tear. So am I. I looked at both of them. I never wanted your inheritance. I only wanted to be treated like family. No one argued, because there was nothing left to argue. A month later, the Facebook posts were gone. The petition disappeared. The education trusts remained exactly as Douglas had planned. Nora began calling every Sunday. One afternoon, before hanging up, she said something I had waited 24 years to hear. Love you, Mom. I smiled through tears. Douglas had spent his life building houses. In the end, he rebuilt a family.